Mom texted, "Don't come around anymore. This is your brother's home now. We've changed the locks." I just replied, "Understood. But you forgot who's been paying property taxes since 2021. Then I logged in, canceled the autopay, and forwarded one email. 2 months later, I got a screenshot from my brother. "Why is there an eviction notice on the door?" I didn't respond, because by then, it was already up for sale. I, 34M, stared at my phone screen for a solid 5 minutes before the words actually registered. The text had come through at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right in the middle of a client meeting. I'd excused myself, thinking it might be an emergency. In a way, I suppose it was. My mother had just told me I was no longer welcome in the house I grew up in. The house where I'd spent every Christmas morning, every birthday, every milestone of my childhood. The house I'd been quietly keeping afloat for the past 4 years while everyone assumed it was still running on Dad's old savings. The message was cold, clinical even. No explanation. No apology. Just a declaration that my younger brother had moved in permanently and they'd changed the locks to make sure I understood I wasn't part of the family equation anymore. I scrolled up through our previous conversations, looking for some hint that this was coming, but there was nothing. Just normal exchanges about weekend plans and her complaining about her knee pain. I sat in my car in the parking garage and let the reality wash over me. For years of automatic payments draining from my account on the 15th of every month. Property taxes that had ballooned to nearly $18,000 annually after the reassessment in 2021. I'd set it up quietly after Dad died, when Mom had broken down crying about losing the house, about not being able to afford to stay in the neighborhood where she'd raised us. My brother had been there that day too, nodding sympathetically but offering nothing. He'd always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong despite doing very little right. He'd bounced from job to job, relationship to relationship, crisis to crisis, and Mom had enabled every stumble with unconditional support and financial bailouts. Meanwhile, I'd built a career in financial consulting, bought my own place, and apparently earned myself the role of invisible ATM. I'd never told anyone about the property taxes. It felt like something that would make family dinners awkward, would make Mom feel guilty, would give my brother ammunition to call me a show-off. So I just handled it quietly, the same way I'd handled Dad's funeral expenses, the same way I'd been handling the occasional loan to Mom that we both knew would never be repaid. But this was different. I typed out my response with steady fingers. No emotion, no anger, just facts. I told her I understood, and that the house was indeed no longer my concern. Then I mentioned she might have forgotten about one small detail regarding who had been paying the property taxes since Dad passed away. I sent it, and put my phone face down on the passenger seat. Then I drove home, poured myself a drink, and opened my laptop. The county assessor's website loaded quickly. I navigated to the payment portal where I'd set up the automatic transfer years ago. My cursor hovered over the cancel button for exactly 3 seconds before I clicked it. The confirmation screen asked if I was sure. I was. The automatic payment scheduled for next week vanished from the queue. Then I went into my email archives and found the documentation. Every receipt, every confirmation, every year of payments made from my personal account to the county tax office on behalf of the property still titled in my parents' names. I compiled them into a single PDF, added a brief cover note explaining that I would no longer be handling these payments, and forwarded the entire package to my mother's email address. I didn't call. I didn't text again. I just sent the email and closed my laptop. The next 2 months passed in strange silence. Mom didn't respond to the email. My brother didn't reach out. It was as if I'd been erased from the family narrative entirely, which I suppose was the point of changing the locks. I threw myself into work, picked up extra projects, and tried not to think about holiday plans that would now need to be completely reimagined. My phone rang occasionally with calls from Mom's number, but I didn't answer. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. There's a difference between those two states that people don't always understand. Anger is hot and reactive. Being done is cold and final. The county doesn't waste time with delinquent property taxes. I knew this professionally, had advised clients on it dozens of times. After 30 days, the penalties start accruing. After 60 days, the notices get more serious. After 90 days, the legal process begins. I timed everything in my head the day I canceled that payment, and I knew approximately when the consequences would start manifesting. The screenshot came through from my brother on a Saturday morning. No greeting, no context, just an image of an official-looking document taped to the front door of the house. The header read, "Notice of Tax Lien Foreclosure Proceedings," in bold letters. Below it, the amount due had ballooned to nearly $40,000 once you factored in the missed payments, penalties, interest, and legal fees. His message beneath the image was panicked and accusatory. He demanded to know what I'd done, why I'd sabotaged the family, how I could be so cruel. The irony of him calling me cruel after they'd literally locked me out of my childhood home wasn't lost on me, but I didn't point it out. I didn't respond at all. I just took a screenshot of his message, saved it to a folder I'd labeled Family Matters, and went back to my coffee. 3 days later, my phone started blowing up. Mom called 17 times in one afternoon. My brother sent a barrage of texts that devolved from angry to desperate to pleading. Apparently, they'd finally opened that email I'd sent 2 months ago and realized the scope of the problem. They'd also apparently discovered that I'd been the one paying the property taxes for years, a fact my brother claimed he never knew. I didn't believe him. I think he knew, or at least suspected, but it was easier to pretend ignorance than acknowledge what I'd been doing. And Mom had definitely known, even if she'd been in willful denial about it. The voicemails were almost impressive in their range. Mom started with confusion, evolved to indignation about how I should have reminded her, plateaued at anger that I'd let this happen, and finally crashed into tearful begging. My brother's messages followed a similar trajectory, but with more profanity and fewer tears. Neither of them apologized for changing the locks. Neither of them acknowledged the cruelty of that original text message. They were solely focused on the crisis at hand, the one I'd created by simply stepping back and letting reality assert itself. I blocked their numbers after the first day of harassment. I knew what was coming next, and I didn't want to be accessible for it. The county moves efficiently when it comes to recouping tax revenue. Within 2 weeks of that first notice, the property was scheduled for a tax lien auction. My mother and brother had neither the savings nor the credit to secure the amount needed to clear the debt. Mom had been living off Social Security and Dad's life insurance payout, which had dwindled to almost nothing. My brother was working part-time at a warehouse and had credit card debt that would make a loan officer weep. They tried to get a home equity loan but discovered that Dad had actually taken one out years before he died, something Mom had apparently forgotten or never fully understood. The house had far less equity than anyone realized, especially once you factored in the current liens. I heard all of this third-hand through a cousin who still spoke to both sides of this rapidly forming schism. She'd called to feel me out, to see if I could be convinced to swoop in and save the day. I told her politely that I was no longer involved in that situation and wished everyone the best. She'd asked how I could be so heartless. I'd asked how my mother could have been so heartless as to lock her own son out of his childhood home via text message without explanation or conversation. She'd gone quiet and ended the call shortly after. The auction date came and went. A property investment company bought the tax lien and initiated foreclosure proceedings when Mom and my brother couldn't negotiate a payment plan. The timeline from that point was roughly 60 days before they'd need to vacate. I didn't go to any of the hearings. I didn't drive by the house. I didn't engage with the flying monkeys various family members sent my way to guilt-trip me into fixing this. I simply existed in my own life, working my job, seeing my friends, and sleeping soundly at night. The listing went live on a Thursday. I only knew because the cousin who'd called me before sent me a link with a message that just said, "I hope you're proud of yourself." The photos showed the house staged beautifully by the investment company, which had clearly put some money into minor cosmetic updates. Fresh paint, new fixtures, landscaped yard. It looked better than it had in years. The asking price was reasonable for the neighborhood, which had appreciated significantly since Mom and Dad had bought the place in the 90s. The investment company would make a healthy profit even after clearing the tax liens and putting money into the updates. That's how these things work. I clicked through the photos with detached curiosity. There was my old bedroom, now painted a neutral beige instead of the blue I'd chosen when I was 12. There was the kitchen where Mom had taught me to make her famous lasagna. There was the backyard where Dad had pushed me on the tire swing until I was too big for it. And there was my brother's stuff, hastily shoved into corners and closets, visible in a few of the shots despite the staging efforts. I wondered where he and Mom would go. I wondered if they'd figure it out together or if this would fracture whatever relationship they had left. Then I closed the browser and went to the gym. Update 1. The house sold in 11 days. Multiple offers, bidding war, final sale price $20,000 over asking. The cousin informed me of this via a text that I didn't respond to. She seemed to think I'd want to know, seemed to think it would make me feel something. It did, I suppose. Relief, maybe. A sense of finality. This chapter was closed. Mom and my brother ended up moving into a 2-bedroom apartment about 40 minutes away, on the other side of the city in a less expensive area. I knew this only because my brother posted about it on social media, framing it as a fresh start and a new adventure while carefully omitting any details about how they'd ended up there. The comments were full of support from people who had no idea what had actually happened. About a month after they moved, I received a letter in the mail. Actual physical mail, sent to my address, written in my mother's handwriting on stationery I recognized from her desk drawer. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. The letter was 6 pages long, handwritten front and back. She'd taken her time with it, that much was clear. The handwriting was neat, careful, the kind of penmanship you use when you're thinking about every word. She started with an apology of sorts, though it was hedged with explanations and justifications. She'd been stressed. My brother had been going through a hard time after another breakup and another lost job. She'd thought giving him the house would give him stability, purpose, something to take pride in. She hadn't meant to hurt me. She hadn't realized I'd been paying the taxes. She'd assumed Dad's estate planning had covered all of that. That last part was the only outright lie in the letter, and we both knew it. I'd had multiple conversations with her about the tax payments over the years, casual mentions of getting the receipt, offhand comments about the county reassessment. She'd known. She'd just chosen to forget it was convenient. The middle section of the letter was harder to read. She talked about how difficult things had been since Dad died, how she'd felt like she was losing her grip on everything, how my brother needed her in a way I never seemed to. That phrase stuck with me. I never seemed to need her. Because I'd been self-sufficient. Because I'd built a life. Because I hadn't come crying for help every time things got difficult. And somehow that had made me expendable. The end of the letter was a plea. Not for money this time, but for relationship. She wanted to talk. She wanted to explain more. She wanted me to understand that she loved both her sons equally, even if her actions hadn't shown it. She wanted a chance to rebuild. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and filed it in the same folder where I'd saved my brother's screenshot. Then I sat down and wrote my own letter in response. I kept it short. 1 page, typed and printed, no handwriting analysis needed. I acknowledged receiving her letter and thanked her for the apology. Then I explained, in clear and unemotional terms, what the past 4 years had looked like from my perspective. The quiet financial support. The unacknowledged sacrifices. The assumption that I'd always be there to clean up whatever messes arose. I told her about the text message, about how it felt to be dismissed so casually after everything I'd done. I explained that I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply stopped subsidizing a situation where I was neither valued nor wanted. The consequences that followed were natural and predictable, the result of choices she and my brother had made. I ended by telling her that I wished her well, but that I needed significant time and space before I could consider rebuilding anything. I didn't close the door entirely, but I didn't leave it wide open either. I just acknowledged that the door existed and that I wasn't ready to walk through it yet. I mailed the letter the next day and felt lighter for having sent it. Update 2. 8 months passed before Mom reached out again. This time it was a simple text message, just asking if we could meet for coffee. No pressure, no expectations, just coffee if I was willing. I thought about it for a week before responding. Part of me wanted to maintain the boundary I'd established, to let the silence stretch indefinitely until either she really understood or we both moved on completely. But another part of me, the part that still remembered being 12 years old and helping her plant tulips in the front yard, wanted to at least hear what she had to say. We met at a neutral location, a cafe neither of us had any history with. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. She'd lost weight. The apartment living was clearly harder on her than the house had been, or maybe it was just the stress of everything that had happened. She didn't ask for anything. That was the first thing I noticed. She just talked about her life, about my brother, about the adjustments they'd been making. My brother had finally landed a stable job with benefits, something in logistics that seemed to suit him. They'd settled into a routine in the apartment. She'd made friends with some of the neighbors. She asked about my life too, and actually listened to the answers. My promotion at work. The trip I'd taken to Colorado. The new restaurant I'd discovered downtown. Normal conversation, the kind we used to have before everything imploded. Near the end of our coffee, she brought up the house. Not to rehash everything, but just to acknowledge it. She told me she finally understood what I'd been doing all those years, and what it had cost me to just walk away. She said she was sorry, and this time it sounded like she meant it without qualifications or justifications. I thanked her for saying that. I didn't absolve everything, didn't pretend the past year hadn't happened, but I acknowledged the apology and told her I appreciated her taking responsibility. We agreed to meet again in a few weeks. No promises beyond that. No grand reconciliation, just an agreement to keep talking and see where it led. As I drove home, I realized I felt okay about the decision. Not great, not terrible, just okay. And maybe that was the right place to start from. My brother never apologized. I heard through Mom that he still blamed me for everything, still believed I'd orchestrated the whole thing out of spite. Maybe he needed to believe that. Maybe accepting his own culpability was too much for him to handle. Either way, I didn't pursue a relationship with him. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. The property taxes on my own home are paid automatically from my account, and I check the county records every few months just to make sure everything is processing correctly. It's become a habit born from experience, a reminder that financial stability requires vigilance, and that family doesn't entitle anyone to unconditional support without appreciation. I drive by the old house sometimes, though not often. The new owners have painted it a different color, replaced the fence, added a deck off the back. It's still recognizable, but fundamentally changed, much like my relationship with my family. And I'm okay with that too. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.